Before time was written, before civilizations carved stories into stone or inked them on parchment, the origins of humanity began on a vast and ancient continent, Africa. Long before history as we know it was recorded, Africa was home to the first humans, the place where our species, Homo sapiens, emerged and began its journey across the globe. The story of human origins in Africa is not one of a single moment or discovery, but rather a complex tapestry woven from millions of years of evolution. Through the diligent work of paleoanthropologists, archaeologists and geneticists, we have come to understand that Africa is not only the cradle of humanity, but also the stage for some of the most significant evolutionary milestones in our deep past. Our lineage stretches back more than 6 million years. The earliest known hominin species, more closely related to humans than to chimpanzees, lived in Africa. Among them was Sahelanthropus chadensis, discovered in Chad and dated to about 7 million years ago. This creature, with a combination of ape-like and human-like features, is thought to be one of the earliest representatives of the human lineage. While not human in the way we think of ourselves today, its fossils mark an important divergence from the last common ancestor we share with modern chimpanzees. As the timeline progresses, we encounter Australopithecus afarensis, a species that lived between 3.9 and 2.9 million years ago in East Africa. The most famous specimen from this species is Lucy, discovered in Ethiopia. Lucy walked upright, although her small brain and long arms showed that she was still part ape, part human in form. The ability to walk on two legs, bipedalism, was a major evolutionary step. It freed the hands for tool use, changed our ancestors' relationship with their environment, and allowed them to travel more efficiently across open landscapes. Over time, early hominins evolved increasingly sophisticated tools and behavior. Around 2.6 million years ago, the Oldowan tool industry emerged. These were simple stone flakes and cores used for cutting, pounding, and scraping. The makers of these tools, likely early members of the genus Homo, such as Homo habilis, demonstrated the cognitive leap that would define our lineage, the ability to shape the environment through technology. As the genus Homo developed, so too did brain size and complexity. Homo erectus, which appeared around 1.9 million years ago in Africa, was a turning point. This species was the first known to use fire, to create more complex tools, and to possibly engage in cooperative hunting. It was also the first human ancestor to leave Africa, spreading into Asia, and eventually Europe. However, Africa remained the core, the evolutionary laboratory where the ancestors of modern humans continued to develop. Fast forward to roughly 300,000 years ago, in the region that is today Morocco, fossils of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, were discovered at a site called Jebel Irhoud. These remains suggest that our species had already emerged in multiple areas across Africa by this time. The features of these early Homo sapiens were not identical to modern humans, but they represent a key stage in our development: larger brains, flatter faces, and smaller jaws, traits that define us today. Genetic evidence supports this African origin of modern humans. Mitochondrial DNA, passed from mothers to their children, can be traced back to a common ancestor, often dubbed Mitochondrial Eve, who lived in Africa, roughly 50,000. Although this term can be misleading if interpreted literally, it reflects the genetic bottleneck from which all modern humans descend. Similarly, Y-chromosome data points to a common male ancestor in Africa. Together, this evidence confirms that all people alive today share deep roots on the African continent. But humanity's story in Africa is not just about biology, it's about culture, creativity, and adaptation. As early humans developed, so too did their behavior. Around 100,000 years ago, evidence of symbolic thinking and artistic expression began to appear. In South Africa, at the Blombos Cave, archaeologists uncovered pieces of ochre engraved with abstract designs, shell beads, likely used as jewelry, and tools that suggest planning and advanced craftsmanship. These findings indicate the emergence of what scientists call behavioral modernity, the suite of traits that distinguishes modern human behavior, including art, language, complex tools, and social organization. While once believed to have emerged suddenly, current evidence suggests a gradual development of these traits, possibly over tens of thousands of years, and largely within Africa. Environmental factors also played a critical role in human evolution. Africa's climate fluctuated greatly over millennia, with periods of aridity and humidity shaping ecosystems and human responses. These environmental pressures likely drove innovation and migration. During dry periods, humans moved toward water sources. During wetter times, they expanded into new territories. This dynamism fostered resilience and adaptability, hallmarks of our species. One of the most intriguing aspects of human history is the Great Migration out of Africa. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, small groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa, likely through the northeastern corridor, near the Red Sea. These early migrants spread into the Middle East, Asia, and eventually Europe and Australia. Along the way, they encountered other hominin species, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans, with whom they interbred. As a result, the DNA of modern non-African populations contains small percentages of genetic material from these now extinct relatives. Despite this outward movement, Africa continued to be a center of human evolution and diversity. The continent hosts the greatest genetic variation among human populations, reflecting its status as our ancestral homeland. This diversity is mirrored in the wide range of cultures, languages and traditions that exist across Africa today, a living legacy of a deep and multifaceted past. Recent discoveries continue to reshape our understanding of this origin story. Fossils and artifacts found across East and Southern Africa, from sites in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and South Africa, have revealed a rich archaeological record. New methods, such as ancient DNA analysis, isotope studies, and high-precision dating techniques, provide ever more detailed pictures of early human life. These include how early humans hunted, what they ate, how they organized their societies, and how they adapted to changing landscapes. The African origin of humanity challenges and enriches the way we think about ourselves. It highlights the shared roots of all people, regardless of where they live today. It reminds us that concepts like race are social constructs, with no basis in biology. Genetically, humans are remarkably similar, more than 99.9% alike, and the small variations we do see are the result of adaptations to local environments over thousands of years. Understanding our origins in Africa also helps explain the deep timescales on which human evolution occurred. We are the product of millions of years of natural selection, genetic drift, environmental change, and cultural innovation. The story of humanity is not a straight line, but a branching tree, with many experiments in survival and adaptation. Some branches led to extinction, one led to... In the end, the phrase "before time was written" captures a period that, while beyond the reach of written records, is accessible through science. The stones, bones, and genomes of Africa tell a story that is both ancient and ongoing. They speak of creatures who walked upright under the African sun, who chipped stones into tools, who painted in caves and buried their dead. These ancestors, though separated from us by vast stretches of time, were part of the same human journey. Their story is ours. Every person on Earth, no matter their language, culture, or appearance, traces their roots back to that one continent. Africa is not only the birthplace of our species, it is the original home from which all human stories flow. By studying the origins of humanity in Africa, we gain more than knowledge of our past. We gain a deeper appreciation for the shared threads that connect us. It is a story of survival, ingenuity, and connection, unfolding long before the first word was written, or the first city built. It is a story that reminds us of our common heritage, and the profound journey that brought us from the heart of Africa to every corner of the globe.
Africa, often referred to as the cradle of humanity, holds the earliest evidence of our species' origins. All modern humans, regardless of where they live today, share a common ancestry that can be traced back to this continent. Through an extensive combination of fossil discoveries, genetic data, and archaeological findings, scientists have established that Homo sapiens, our own species, first evolved in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. These early humans were not exactly like us in every way, but they carried the biological and cognitive traits that define modern humans today. One of the most significant discoveries supporting this timeline comes from the site of Jebel Uhud in Morocco, where fossils dating back to around 300,000 years ago were found. These remains showed a blend of archaic and modern features, suggesting that Homo sapiens had already emerged in form, even if behaviorally they were still evolving. What makes this discovery even more compelling is that it shifts the origin of our species from a single Eden-like region to a broader Pan-African context. Rather than evolving in one specific location, evidence now suggests that early Homo sapiens developed across various parts of the continent, contributing to a more complex and regionally diverse evolutionary process. Fossils are only part of the story. Genetic research has provided an even deeper layer of insight. Mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mothers to their children, reveals a lineage that traces back to a woman who lived in Africa around 50,000. While she wasn't the only woman alive at that time, all modern mitochondrial DNA can be traced back to her line. Similarly, the Y chromosome passed from fathers to sons also points to a common male ancestor rooted in Africa. These genetic markers do not imply a single origin individual in a literal sense, but instead highlight population bottlenecks and migratory patterns that shaped human ancestry. Africa's role as the birthplace of humanity is further supported by the extraordinary genetic diversity found among its current populations. In fact, people of African descent carry more genetic variation than any other group on the planet. This is because genetic diversity accumulates over time, and African populations have had the longest amount of time to accumulate these variations. Non-African populations, in contrast, are descended from relatively small groups of early humans who left Africa between 60,000 and 70,000. These groups represent a much narrower subset of the total genetic variation found in their ancestral homeland. The diversity observed within African genomes also hints at a deep and complex population history, with multiple, sometimes isolated groups contributing to the modern human gene pool. Rather than emerging from a single group or location, it's likely that early Homo sapiens populations across Africa were interacting, migrating, and interbreeding over tens of thousands of years. This interconnectedness helped shape the flexible, adaptive, and intelligent species that eventually expanded beyond the continent. Beyond genetics and fossils, the archaeological record paints a vivid picture of early life in Africa. Sites such as Blombos Cave in South Africa have revealed evidence of symbolic thinking, long considered a hallmark of modern cognition. Engraved ochre stones, pierced shells used as beads, and finely crafted tools found at this site and others indicate that early humans were not only surviving, they were also expressing themselves and possibly engaging in forms of communication and social organization. These behaviors, which date back over 70,000 years, are among the earliest known examples of cultural innovation and cognitive complexity. Africa's climate and geography played critical roles in shaping this evolutionary journey. The continent's diverse environments, from savannas and forests to mountains and deserts, offered a range of ecological challenges and opportunities. Climate shifts over millennia repeatedly transformed these landscapes, driving migrations, forcing adaptation, and influencing the direction of human development. These pressures encouraged not only physical and genetic adaptations, but also behavioral innovations that allowed humans to thrive in constantly changing conditions. Understanding that Africa is the origin point of all modern humans shifts our perception of humanity as a whole. It reveals that the differences we see among global populations today are relatively recent and superficial when compared to our shared history. All humans, regardless of language, nationality, or skin color, share a common African ancestry. This scientific truth underlines the unity of the human species and dismantles outdated ideas of racial hierarchy, showing instead a remarkable story of resilience, adaptation, and connection. In recognizing Africa as the cradle of humanity, we also acknowledge the continent's immense contribution to the human story. Long before written history, empires, or modern nations, Africa nurtured the early steps of our species. It was there that our ancestors took their first upright steps, fashioned their first tools, communicated ideas, formed social groups, and eventually developed the skills and traits that define us today. The story of humanity does not begin with cities or kings, but with the quiet, persistent struggle to survive, learn, and evolve, a story written in the bones, stones, and genes that point us all back to Africa.
The evolutionary path that led to modern humans is marked by a series of milestones and key ancestral species, many of which lived and evolved exclusively in Africa. These early hominins represent crucial stages in the long process of human development, not only in terms of physical traits like bipedalism and increasing brain size, but also in the emergence of new behaviors such as tool-making and complex social interaction. By examining these species and the innovations they introduced, scientists have been able to reconstruct a detailed narrative of how humans gradually evolved from more primitive ancestors into the intelligent and adaptable beings we are today. One of the most significant early ancestors is Australopithecus afarensis, which lived between about 3.9 and 2.9 million years ago in East Africa. The most famous fossil of this species, nicknamed Lucy, was discovered in 1974 in Ethiopia and has become an icon of human evolution. Australopithecus afarensis walked upright, making it one of the earliest known bipeds. This adaptation marked a major shift in human evolution. Walking on two legs freed the hands for carrying objects, and using tools allowed for more energy-efficient movement over long distances, and gave early hominins the ability to see over tall grasses in open savannas. Although afarensis still had a small brain and many ape-like features, its ability to walk upright was a foundational development for everything that followed. Following the Australopithecines came the emergence of the genus Homo, a major evolutionary step. One of the earliest members of this genus is Homo habilis, which appeared around 2.4. Fossils of Homo habilis have been found primarily in East Africa, and they show evidence of slightly larger brains compared to Australopithecus, as well as a more human-like face and hands. What sets Homo habilis apart, however, is its association with the earliest known stone tool. These tools, part of what is called the Old Owen industry, were simple but effective flakes and cores used for cutting meat, cracking bones, and processing plant materials. The very name habilis means handyman, reflecting the importance of tool use in this species' evolutionary success. With Homo habilis, we see the beginnings of more complex problem-solving and the first signs of cultural behavior. Tool-making suggests forward-thinking, planning, and possibly even some form of communication to teach others how to craft and use tools effectively. This was not just a biological evolution, but a cognitive and behavioral one as well. The capacity for learning, sharing knowledge, and manipulating the environment set Homo habilis on a path that would be expanded significantly by its evolutionary successor. Around 1.9 million years ago, a new and more advanced human ancestor emerged, Homo erectus. This species lived in Africa, but was also the first hominin to migrate out of the continent, reaching parts of Asia and Europe. Homo erectus had a much larger brain than its predecessors, ranging between 600 and 1100 cubic centimeters, and a more modern body shape, including longer legs and shorter arms, which made it well suited for long-distance walking and running. This shift in body form indicates an even greater adaptation to open, arid environments, and the physical challenges of a nomadic lifestyle. In terms of technology, Homo erectus marked a turning point. This species developed what's known as the Achillean tool industry, characterized by more sophisticated and symmetrical stone hand axes and cleavers. These tools required greater skill to produce and suggest improved coordination, patience, and an ability to visualize the final product before starting work. There is also evidence that Homo erectus may have controlled fire, another major leap forward. Fire provided warmth, protection from predators, and a means to cook food, which not only made nutrients easier to digest but may have contributed to brain growth by allowing for more calorie-rich diets. Social behavior in Homo erectus was likely more advanced as well. The need to cooperate in hunting large game, share resources, care for the young, and perhaps even communicate in complex ways, would have encouraged the development of early group dynamics that resemble those of modern humans. While there is no direct evidence of spoken language, changes in skull structure suggest the potential for vocal communication, far beyond that of previous species. All these evolutionary milestones, from bipedalism in Australopithecus to tool-making in Homo habilis, and the migration, fire use, and cultural complexity of Homo erectus, laid the groundwork for the eventual emergence of Homo sapiens. Each of these species played a role in shaping the biological and behavioral traits that define us today. Their fossils, tools, and the environments they lived in give us a window into a world long before written history, where survival depended not only on strength and adaptation, but also on intelligence, cooperation, and innovation. The evolutionary path was not a straight line, nor did each species simply replace the one before it. Many of these hominins coexisted and may have interacted. Some lineages ended in extinction, while others contributed directly to our ancestry. What remains consistent, however, is that Africa was the center of this evolutionary process. It was on this continent that key developments occurred, walking upright, using tools, increasing brain size, and forming early society. These are not just milestones in our past, they are the foundation of what makes us human. The emergence of behavioral modernity represents one of the most profound shifts in human evolution, and compelling evidence shows that this transformation began in Africa, tens of thousands of years before similar patterns appeared elsewhere in the world. Behavioral modernity refers to a suite of traits that include symbolic thought, advanced planning, complex tools, artistic expression, and possibly the early foundations of language and organized social structures. These characteristics are what make Homo sapiens culturally and cognitively distinct from earlier hominins, even those with comparable anatomy. For a long time it was believed that behavioral modernity arose suddenly, and only after humans migrated out of Africa. However, archaeological discoveries from within the continent have completely redefined this understanding. The evidence now shows that early humans living in Africa were already demonstrating many hallmarks of modern behavior more than 70,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. This indicates that the cognitive foundations of humanity developed gradually on African soil, shaped by complex interactions between biology, environment, and culture. One of the most important sites offering insight into early human behavior is Blombos Cave, located on the southern coast of South Africa. Excavations there have revealed a treasure trove of artifacts that indicate symbolic thinking and deliberate artistic creation. Among the most striking finds are pieces of ochre, an iron-rich mineral pigment engraved with abstract geometric patterns, dating back approximately 75,000 years. These engraved ochres are not functional tools, rather they appear to represent intentional design. Their existence suggests that humans at that time were capable of symbolic representation, a cognitive skill that underlies modern language, art, and ritual. In the same layers of sediment, archaeologists found shell beads with small holes drilled into them, likely for stringing as necklaces or other forms of personal adornment. These are among the earliest known examples of jewelry, and their significance lies not in their material value, but in their symbolic purpose. Wearing such items signals identity, status, or group affiliation, concepts that require abstract thought and social awareness. The creation of ornaments also implies the presence of cultural traditions, and perhaps even teaching practices, as these techniques would need to be passed down from one generation to the next. Blombos Cave is not the only site providing evidence of behavioral modernity in Africa. Pinnacle Point, Symbolic Cave, Klusi's River, and Dipkloof Rock Shelter, all in South Africa, offer further signs of advanced cognition and culture dating back over 7. At these locations, researchers have found finely crafted stone points, evidence of heat treatment in tool production, and remnants of adhesives used to haft stone tools onto wooden shafts. These technologies indicate a high degree of planning, material understanding, and foresight. For example, the use of fire to improve the quality of stone for tool making reveals both experimental thinking and knowledge transfer. Other artifacts such as compound tools made from multiple materials and evidence of plant processing for medicinal or dietary use also suggest complex thought processes. The presence of spatial organization in living areas, with distinct zones for sleeping, working, and food preparation, points to a sophisticated level of social structure and environmental awareness. These behaviors did not emerge all at once. Instead, they appear to have developed gradually across different regions and populations of early Homo sapiens in Africa. This mosaic pattern of innovation supports the view that modern human behavior was not a sudden revolution, but an evolving process shaped by ecological challenges, population pressures, and cultural exchange. Environmental changes, such as shifts in climate and sea levels, likely played a role in driving innovation. During periods of environmental stress, groups may have needed to cooperate more closely, explore new resources, or develop novel tools to adapt, spurring behavioral advancement. The idea that modern behavior originated in Africa is further supported by genetic evidence, which shows that all non-African populations descend from a small group of people who left the continent between 60,000. This means that the complex behaviors observed in African archaeological sites were already part of the cognitive toolkit that early humans carried with them as they migrated into new lands. In other words, humans were already modern in mind before they began their global journey. This understanding reshapes our perception of human evolution. It reveals that African populations were not only biologically modern, but also cognitively advanced, long before the rise of civilizations, writing, or formal education. These early humans had the mental capacity for creativity, abstract thinking, social bonding, and long-term planning. They expressed themselves through art, adorned their bodies with symbols of identity, and developed tools that required multiple steps to produce. What makes this even more remarkable is that these innovations occurred in small, mobile groups, living in challenging environments. Despite limited resources and constant adaptation to shifting climates, They laid the foundation for the explosion of culture and technology that would eventually sweep across the globe. Their achievements are a testament to the depth and richness of Africa's contribution to the human story, not only as the birthplace of our species, but also as the source of our creativity, intelligence, and culture. By recognizing that behavioral modernity first appeared in Africa, we acknowledge that the roots of human culture and cognition run deep in the continent's prehistory. It also challenges outdated narratives that once placed cultural sophistication solely in the hands of later European populations. The archaeological record makes it clear, long before time was written, humans in Africa were already shaping their world with symbols, tools, and imagination. They were artists, thinkers, innovators, and they were the ancestors of us all. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, a monumental chapter in the human story unfolded, as small groups of Homo sapiens began leaving the African continent to explore and settle in distant lands. This event, commonly referred to as the Out of Africa migration, marked the beginning of humanity's global dispersal and had a profound and lasting impact on the development of populations around the world. Though this migration involved only a fraction of the total human population at the time, the descendants of those early migrants would eventually populate every habitable continent, carrying with them the physical traits, cognitive abilities, and cultural knowledge that had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in Africa. The people who left Africa during this period were anatomically modern humans, indistinguishable in form from contemporary humans. They were equipped not only with advanced toolkits and foraging strategies, but also with the cognitive capacity for symbolic thinking, language, and social cooperation. These abilities gave them a considerable advantage, as they encountered unfamiliar environments, unpredictable climates, and in some regions, other human species that had already settled there. The exact routes taken during these early migrations are still being studied, but evidence suggests that the most likely path out of Africa was through the northeastern region of the continent, across what is now the Sinai Peninsula, or via a southern coastal route, through what is today Yemen, along the shores of the Red Sea. From there, humans gradually moved into the Arabian Peninsula, then spread eastward into Asia, eventually reaching Southeast Asia, Australia, and much later Europe. Each migration wave, although relatively small in numbers, carried with it the genetic legacy and adaptive strategies of their African ancestors. Once outside Africa, these early human groups encountered new environments that required further innovation and adaptation. In colder regions, for example, they developed clothing, built shelters, and refined their hunting techniques. In coastal areas, they began to exploit marine resources. Migration across different ecosystems led to dietary changes, regional variations in behavior, and eventually the emergence of diverse cultures and traditions. These developments were not just responses to environmental pressures, but also evidence of the plasticity and problem-solving capabilities that define Homo sapiens. During their expansion into new territories, these early modern humans encountered other hominin species, such as the Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, and the Denisovans in parts of Asia. Rather than completely replacing these populations, modern humans interbred with them, leaving a small but detectable genetic legacy. Today, people of non-African descent carry between 1% to 2% Neanderthal DNA, while some populations in Oceania and parts of Asia also carry traces of Denisovan DNA. These interactions, though limited, show that Homo sapiens did not evolve in isolation, but as part of a broader and more complex hominin family tree. These genetic exchanges likely had biological implications. Some of the inherited genes may have provided advantages, such as improved immune system responses or adaptations to new climates. However, the vast majority of modern human DNA still comes from the original African populations. What the Out of Africa model makes clear is that all non-African people alive today descend from a relatively small group of pioneers who left Africa tens of thousands of years ago, and that these migrants were just one branch of a diverse and thriving population that remained on the continent. Archaeological evidence outside of Africa supports the timeline of this migration. In Australia, human remains and tools have been dated to at least 65,000 years ago, suggesting an early and rapid coastal migration. In Europe, the arrival of modern humans is recorded around 45,000 years ago, where they coexisted with Neanderthals for several thousand years before the Neanderthals eventually disappeared. In East Asia and Siberia, artifacts and fossils reveal a long and complex history of human occupation, again pointing to early migration patterns originating from Africa. Despite these global movements, Africa remained a vibrant center of human evolution and culture. Populations that stayed on the continent continued to diversify, adapt, and develop unique cultural traditions. The genetic diversity among African populations today is greater than that of the rest of the world combined, reflecting both their deep evolutionary history and the fact that African populations did not go through the same genetic bottlenecks as those who left the continent. This diversity is a living testament to Africa's central role in human history and serves as a powerful reminder that all humans, regardless of their current location, share a common origin. The out-of-Africa migration was not a single event, but a series of dispersals that likely occurred over thousands of years. Some groups may have left and perished, while others thrived and established new communities. These movements were driven by a variety of factors, including changing climates, resource availability, population pressures, and simple human curiosity and ingenuity. The capacity to explore, to seek new opportunities, and to adapt to unfamiliar environments is one of the defining characteristics of our species, and it was this spirit that propelled our ancestors out of Africa and into the wider world. Understanding the details of this migration deepens our appreciation of the shared heritage that connects all people. While geographic distance and cultural differences may seem great today, they are recent developments when viewed against the scale of evolutionary time. The genetic, archaeological, and anthropological evidence all point to a single, unbroken human lineage that began in Africa and spread outward, adapting to diverse conditions and forming the richly varied tapestry of human life we see today. This journey out of Africa was not the end of evolution, but rather a new beginning, one that would see the rise of agriculture, cities, languages, and civilizations. It set the stage for the creation of societies, the invention of writing, and the unfolding of history. But at its core, it began with small groups of African humans who ventured into unknown lands, carrying within them the legacy of a continent that had shaped their biology, their minds, and their potential. Their movement changed the world forever, and their story continues in every human alive today. Modern genetic studies have provided some of the most compelling and precise evidence that all humans share a common origin in Africa. Advances in genome sequencing and population genetics have made it possible to trace human ancestry back tens of thousands of years, far beyond the reach of written history or even archaeological artifacts. The results of these studies consistently point to one remarkable conclusion: Africa holds the deepest genetic roots of humanity, and all people living today, regardless of race, ethnicity, or geographic location, descend from African ancestors. One of the most striking findings is the level of genetic diversity found among present-day African populations. In genetic terms, diversity refers to the number of different genetic variations, or alleles, found within a population. African populations, especially those with deep ancestral ties to specific regions, such as the San people of southern Africa or the Umbati of Central Africa, show greater genetic diversity than populations anywhere else in the world. This is significant because genetic variation accumulates over time. The more diversity a population has, the older it is likely to be. In contrast, populations outside Africa tend to show far less genetic variation, indicating that they descend from a relatively small group of people who left Africa during the migratory events that occurred around 60,000. This observation is further supported by studies of mitochondrial DNA and Y-chromosome DNA, which trace maternal and paternal lines, respectively. Mitochondrial DNA, passed from mothers to their children, has been used to identify what scientists call Mitochondrial Eve, a woman who lived in Africa roughly 50,000 to 200,000 years ago, and whose mitochondrial line is shared by all humans alive today. Similarly, the Y chromosome traces male lineage and leads to a common ancestor known as Y-chromosomal Adam, also rooted in Africa, though he lived at a different time than Mitochondrial Eve. These are not single ancestors in the sense of being the only man or woman alive at the time, but rather the most recent common ancestors from whom modern humans inherited those specific genetic markers. Another important piece of evidence comes from genome-wide studies that analyze the entirety of a person's genetic makeup. These studies have confirmed that non-African populations carry only a subset of the genetic diversity present in African populations. This supports the founder effect, a phenomenon in which a small group breaks off from a larger population and carries with it only a limited range of genetic diversity. This is exactly what happened when modern humans left Africa and spread across the globe. As these small populations settled in new regions, genetic drift and adaptation to local environments led to the physical and cultural differences observed today. However, these differences represent only a tiny fraction of the total human genetic variation. In fact, geneticists have found that any two individuals from the same population, regardless of where in the world they live, are likely to be about 19. The remaining 0.1% accounts for all visible differences among humans, such as skin color, hair texture, eye shape, and susceptibility to certain diseases. This tiny percentage, while important for understanding adaptation and evolution, reinforces how closely related all humans are. It underscores the fact that race is a social construct with no biological basis. From a genetic standpoint, humans are a single species with common origin. Furthermore, genomic research has illuminated the paths taken during the great human migrations and helped reconstruct the movement of populations over time. By comparing the genetic signatures of various groups, scientists can estimate when populations split, how they moved, and where they interbred. For instance, while most genetic evidence supports a single primary migration out of Africa, there is also evidence of earlier, unsuccessful dispersals that left genetic traces in some isolated populations. Similarly, as humans migrated and settled in different environments, their genomes adapted in small but meaningful ways. These adaptations, such as lactose tolerance, resistance to malaria, or variations in skin pigmentation, represent responses to local environmental pressures, not fundamental divisions between peoples. The continuing study of ancient DNA has added even more depth to this picture. By extracting and sequencing DNA from ancient remains, scientists have been able to directly compare the genetics of early humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. These studies have shown that while there was some interbreeding between modern humans and other hominins, the genetic contribution from those groups is relatively small. The overwhelming majority of our genetic makeup still comes from the original Homo sapiens population that evolved in Africa. Ancient DNA has also confirmed that the oldest lineages, those closest to the common ancestors of all modern humans, are found within Africa, once again reinforcing the continent's central role in our evolutionary history. In recent years, large-scale genetic projects involving African populations have begun to fill in previously missing details. For a long time, much of human genetics research focused on non-African populations, leading to an incomplete understanding of global human variation. Now, initiatives like the African Genome Variation Project and H3 Africa are mapping the incredible richness of African genomes, uncovering not only the origins of humanity, but also helping to identify genes linked to diseases and traits that may lead to new medical insights. These efforts are not only correcting a scientific imbalance, but also emphasizing Africa's vital place in both our past and our future. The genetic evidence for a shared African origin is a unifying theme in human history. It demonstrates that beneath the surface, all humans are deeply connected, branches of the same ancient tree. While history, culture, and language have created vast and beautiful diversity in human societies, the roots of that diversity reach back to a single. In every human genome lies a story written in ancient African landscapes of survival, adaptation, and the shared journey that continues to shape who we are.